The package sitting on my doorstep wasn't mine. I knew that before I even picked it up, a massive textbook-shaped thing addressed to someone named Genevieve White when I, Molly Russell, hadn't ordered anything heavier than eyeliner in weeks. The delivery guy must have mixed up the addresses again. Damn it, I muttered, hefting the surprisingly heavy box. The return address showed it was from some medical publisher. A quick check of the address showed this Genevieve person lived just 4 blocks over. I could have called the delivery company, but something made me tuck the package under my arm instead. My afternoon appointments had canceled, and my fingers were still cramping from 8 straight hours of precisely placing acupuncture needles. Some fresh air might do me good. Fort Worth in October was showing off its good side today. Warm sunshine without the brutal summer heat. As I walked, I ran through my mental checklist for tomorrow's patients. Mrs. Henderson's sciatica, the college kid with migraines, the construction worker with phantom limb pain that Western medicine couldn't touch. The house was a neat craftsman, with potted lavender flanking the steps. I rang the doorbell and waited, suddenly aware I was still wearing my clinic clothes, tailored black pants and a silk blouse with tiny embroidered golden dragons. Professional, but distinctly not mainstream medical. The door swung open, and my prepared explanation evaporated. She was tall, almost a head above my 5'4", with tousled red hair that couldn't decide if it was auburn or copper in the afternoon light. Blue eyes, bloodshot with exhaustion, widened as they took me in. "Can I help you?" Her voice had that particular rasp of someone who'd been awake far too long. I thrust the package forward like an offering. This came to my place by mistake. "You're Genevieve White?" "That's my anatomy textbook, thank God." She took it, fingers brushing mine. "I've been waiting for this revision. The publisher promised it 3 weeks ago." "You're a doctor?" I asked, noticing the lanyard hanging by the door with a hospital ID. "Pain management specialist." She smiled, transforming her tired face. "Though right now I'm just pain personified. 36-hour shift. That should be illegal." I found myself smiling back. "Probably. Want to come in for coffee? Least I can do for my package courier." I hesitated only a moment. My empty apartment could wait, sure. Her home was organized chaos, medical journals stacked on surfaces, post-it notes everywhere. The coffee she handed me was strong enough to make my eyes water. "So what do you do, mystery package deliverer?" she asked, sinking into an armchair. "I'm an acupuncturist. I run Eastern Meridian Clinic over on Henderson." I watched her face, waiting for the skeptical expression I usually got from medical professionals. Instead, she looked intrigued. "Alternative pain management? We should talk shop sometime. I've had patients ask about acupuncture." "Most doctors think what I do is glorified placebo effect," I admitted. "Pain is complicated." She shrugged. "I'm interested in results, not just methodology." I leaned forward, excited by her open-mindedness, and promptly knocked over my coffee. It splashed across what looked like patient files on her coffee table. "Shit, I'm so sorry." I grabbed napkins, mortified. "Don't worry," she was already blotting papers. "These are copies. Though you now owe me dinner for destroying my homework." The words hung between us, and I saw a flush creep across her cheeks, like she hadn't meant to say it aloud. "Deal," I said before she could retract. "How about Friday? I know a great Thai place." She glanced up, our hands almost touching over the damp papers. Something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty? Interest? "Friday works. Though fair warning, I'll probably talk your ear off about nerve conduction studies. And I'll counter with meridian theory and chi blockages." We exchanged numbers, and as I walked home, I couldn't quite place why my heart was beating faster than my brisk stride warranted. It had been ages since I'd connected so quickly with anyone, especially someone from the traditional medical world. What had started as a simple errand had somehow become something else entirely, something unexpected, something that felt strangely like possibility. My acupuncture clinic wasn't what most people expected. No incense, no Buddha statues, no pan flutes playing in the background. Eastern Meridian was clinical white, with subtle jade accents. Medical charts showing meridian lines shared wall space with my diplomas. Undergraduate work at Baylor, followed by 3 years of specialized training in traditional Chinese medicine. I was finishing charting notes when my receptionist poked her head in. "There's someone here to see you. Says she's not a patient." Genevieve stood in my waiting room, her copper hair pulled back in a professional knot, wearing tailored slacks and a blue blouse that matched her eyes. Our Thai dinner had been 4 days ago, a night of spirited debate about pain management approaches that somehow stretched to 3 hours. "Dr. White," I said with a smile. "House call?" "Professional curiosity," she replied. "I referred a patient to you yesterday, Mrs. Chambers with the chronic shoulder pain. I wanted to see what you actually do here." I raised an eyebrow. "Checking to make sure I'm not a quack?" "Researching complementary approaches," she corrected. "Mind if I observe a treatment?" "Not Mrs. Chambers, that would be inappropriate. But maybe you could show me your technique?" I hesitated. Most Western doctors who wanted to observe were looking for ammunition to dismiss my work. But something about Genevieve's genuine curiosity made me nod. "I have 20 minutes before my next patient. I can demonstrate the basic concepts." I led her into a treatment room and patted the table. "Hop up." "Me? I thought you'd use a model or something." "You've got a human body last I checked, and don't worry, I won't turn you into a pincushion for your first visit." She reluctantly climbed onto the table. "I should warn you, I've got the typical doctor problem, terrible self-care habits. Let me guess. You survive on coffee and work 80 hours a week?" 73 last week, actually. She tried to sound proud, but I heard the exhaustion. I took her wrist, fingers finding her pulse points with practiced ease. Her eyebrows rose as I concentrated. "What can you possibly tell from that?" "Your liver qi is stagnant, and you're running on adrenal reserves," I said matter-of-factly. "You have tension headaches, probably sleep poorly, and I'd bet your digestion is inconsistent at best." Her mouth opened slightly. "That's accurate. It's not magic. It's systematic assessment based on pulse qualities, complexion, and the fact that you just told me you work 73-hour weeks." She laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her professional demeanor. "Fair enough." I showed her the basic meridian pathways, explaining how each connected to organ systems. When I pressed a point on her hand that corresponded to headache relief, she winced. "Tender? How does that work, neurologically speaking?" "From your perspective, gate control theory, endorphin release, local anti-inflammatory response. From mine, restoring proper energy flow through blocked channels." She considered this. Different languages for the same phenomenon. Exactly. I was surprised by her openness. Her pager beeped, breaking the moment. "Hospital," she sighed. "Rain check on the rest of the demonstration?" "Anytime," I said, meaning it. 2 nights later, I was closing up when my phone buzzed with a text from Genevieve. "Still at clinic?" I replied affirmatively, and 15 minutes later she appeared with a bottle of wine and takeout bags. "Thought you might be hungry. I just finished a shift and I hate eating alone." We sat in my office, shoes kicked off, sharing pad thai and discussing difficult cases until midnight. I told her about my struggle with insurance companies refusing to cover alternative treatments. She confessed her frustration with patients wanting instant fixes for complex pain issues. "Sometimes I feel like I'm failing them," she admitted, swirling her wine. "When standard protocols don't work, they look at me like I've betrayed them." "I know that look," I said. "I get it from people who try acupuncture as a last resort, expecting miracles from one treatment." "We're not so different," she murmured, her eyes meeting mine, "just working from opposite sides." Something shifted between us that night. A recognition, a connection beyond professional curiosity. When she left, her hug lingered a moment longer than strictly necessary, and I found myself watching her car until its taillights disappeared around the corner. I told myself it was just nice to have a colleague who respected my work. But somewhere deeper, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. I was wrapping up a late appointment when my receptionist appeared in the doorway. "Your 4 o'clock is here, but..." She lowered her voice. "It's Dr. White. She looks terrible." My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen Genevieve in almost 2 weeks, our text exchanges brief and professional. I thought perhaps she'd lost interest in our discussions after getting what she needed for her research. When I entered the waiting room, I almost didn't recognize her. Genevieve sat hunched in a chair, sunglasses on despite being indoors. Her normally perfect posture collapsed. "Jen?" I approached carefully. "What's wrong?" "Migraine," she whispered. "Day 3, nothing's working." I helped her to a treatment room, noticing how she winced at every sound. "Have you taken anything?" "Everything. Triptans, NSAIDs, Even tried a shot of Toradol at the hospital. Can't keep going like this. Her voice was thin with pain. Let me help you, I said softly, dimming the lights. Trust me? She nodded almost imperceptibly and let me guide her onto the table. I took her pulse, noting the rapid, tight quality, and examined her complexion, pale with tension. I'm going to place needles at specific points to interrupt your pain pathways, I explained quietly. You might feel a sensation of heaviness or tingling. That's normal. As I worked, placing needles at gallbladder 20 at the base of her skull, liver 3 between her toes and other strategic points, I noticed tears leaking from beneath her closed eyelids. Am I hurting you? I asked, alarmed. No, she whispered, just desperate. I had to cancel patients yesterday, couldn't function. The strongest people often have the hardest time asking for help, I said, gently placing the final needle. Rest now, 20 minutes. I dimmed the lights further and left her in silence. When I returned, her breathing had deepened. I removed the needles carefully, then applied gentle pressure to the points with my fingertips. How's the pain? I asked. Down from unbearable to merely awful, she admitted. First improvement in days. You need rest and another treatment tomorrow, I said firmly. Doctor's orders. You're not that kind of doctor, she murmured with the ghost of a smile. Today I am, and I'm driving you home. She didn't argue, which told me just how bad she felt. At her house, I helped her inside and made her drink water before tucking her into bed with an ice pack. Stay? She asked, her voice small and unlike her usual confident tone. Just until I fall asleep? The pain comes back worse when I'm alone. I sat beside her, not questioning the flutter in my chest when she reached for my hand. Her fingers intertwined with mine as she drifted off. The next morning, I returned before my clinic hours, bringing breakfast and performing another treatment. By the third day, Genevieve was sitting up in her kitchen, color returned to her cheeks, eating the eggs I'd scrambled. You've taken better care of me than anyone has in years, she said, watching me over her coffee mug. That's what friends do. The word friends felt insufficient somehow. Is that what we are, friends? Her blue eyes held mine. My pulse quickened. The air between us seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. I leaned forward slightly. Her phone rang, shattering the moment. Hospital administration, emergency staffing issue. She had to go in. I'm sorry, she said, already reaching for her coat. Rain check? Of course, I replied, trying to hide my disappointment. You're feeling better? Like a new woman. Thank you, truly. After she left, I sat alone in her kitchen, wondering what would have happened if that phone hadn't rung. The question haunted me through the day, through the week that followed. Genevieve texted her thanks again, then nothing for days. When a mutual patient mentioned seeing her, I felt an irrational pang of jealousy. I told myself I was being ridiculous. She was a busy doctor, not someone who ghosted after a date, because we hadn't been dating. Had we? The lines had blurred somewhere between professional curiosity and personal care. So I did what any mature adult would do. I buried myself in work, stayed late at the clinic, and pretended I wasn't checking my phone every hour. It wasn't until my receptionist commented that I seemed distracted that I realized how thoroughly Genevieve White had gotten under my skin, and how much I needed to get her out again before I embarrassed myself further. Something was wrong the moment I turned onto my clinic street. The early morning light should have illuminated my simple storefront with its understated Eastern Meridian sign. Instead, there was a police car, lights silently flashing, parked out front. My heart dropped into my stomach as I accelerated, nearly hitting the curb as I parked. The front window of my clinic, the large plate glass where I'd hand-painted the gold meridian lines, was shattered, jagged pieces still clinging to the frame like broken teeth. Ma'am, are you the owner? An officer approached as I stumbled out of my car. I nodded numbly, unable to find words as I stared at the destruction. The alarm system I'd installed after opening 3 years ago was wailing faintly inside. How long had it been screaming into the empty street before someone called it in? The officers let me inside after taking my information. The destruction was surgical and complete. My reception area was ransacked, computers smashed, files scattered, but it was my treatment rooms that brought tears to my eyes. Cabinets upended, my carefully organized herbs scattered across the floor, equipment broken. Even my diplomas had been torn from the walls. Looks like they were searching for something specific, the officer said, watching me survey the damage. Any medications kept on premises? I shook my head. Just herbs and acupuncture supplies, nothing with street value. Cash? We're mostly electronic payments. The cash box has maybe $200. I wandered through the wreckage, trying to catalog what was missing, what was damaged, what could be salvaged. My hands shook as I picked up a smashed jar of dried ginseng root. 3 years of building my practice, of earning respect in the medical community, and now this. I don't remember calling Genevieve. I must have, though, because suddenly she was there, still in scrubs from her night shift, her hand steady on my shoulder as I gave my statement to the police. "You're staying with me tonight," she said when the officers finally left, no argument in her tone. "This will all still be here tomorrow." I didn't have the energy to refuse. I let her guide me to her car, let her drive me to her house, let her pour me tea with a shot of whiskey that burned sweetly down my throat. "I can't afford this," I finally said, the first words I'd spoken in hours. The insurance deductible, replacing everything. I was just breaking even. "One problem at a time," Genevieve said quietly. "First, you need sleep." But sleep wouldn't come. I lay on her guest bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the destruction in my mind. Around 3 a.m., Genevieve appeared in the doorway. "Can't sleep either," she admitted. "Want company?" She sat on the edge of the bed, and I found myself curling against her warmth, tears finally coming. Her arms encircled me, strong and steady, as I sobbed into her shoulder. "I don't know if I can start over," I whispered. "You won't have to. Not alone, anyway," she murmured into my hair. "We'll figure it out." We must have fallen asleep like that, because I woke to sunlight and Genevieve making coffee, already on the phone with her insurance agent asking about riders for business protection. She drove me back to the clinic later that morning. In the harsh daylight, the destruction seemed even worse. I stepped carefully through glass shards, trying to decide where to begin. "I'll help you sort through everything," Genevieve said, already pulling on latex gloves from her medical bag. We worked in silence for hours, separating what could be saved from what was lost. It was as we moved a heavy oak cabinet in my primary treatment room that we found it, a crumpled piece of paper wedged underneath, like it had been dropped and kicked there. Genevieve smoothed it open, her brow furrowing as she read. "Molly, look at this." The handwriting was shaky, the paper torn from a prescription pad. "I'm sorry about the damage, desperate for help. The pain won't stop. Tried everything. Heard you could help when doctors can't. Please call this number if you find this. I'm afraid I'll die from this pain." Below was a phone number and a strange sequence of symptoms: burning face pain, electric shocks when eating, can't sleep for weeks. "What the hell?" I whispered, looking at the ransacked room with new eyes. "They broke in looking for treatment?" "Not just any treatment," Genevieve said slowly, her doctor's mind clearly working. "This sounds like trigeminal neuralgia. It's called the suicide disease because the pain is so severe and treatments often don't work." We looked at each other over the crumpled note, the destruction around us suddenly cast in a different light. Not senseless vandalism, but desperation. Not malice, but pain so unbearable it had driven someone to this. "What do we do?" I asked. Genevieve folded the note carefully. "First, we call the police back. Then, I think we need to understand what we're dealing with." "We should call the police," I said, staring at the note in Genevieve's hand. We'd spent the morning cleaning broken glass and cataloging damage while waiting for the insurance adjuster. "Absolutely," Genevieve agreed, but she hesitated before reaching for her phone. "But this person, they're suffering from something terrible. Something that made them destroy my livelihood," I reminded her, anger flaring. "I can't just ignore that because they left a sob story." "Trigeminal neuralgia isn't just any pain," Genevieve said quietly. "It's among the worst conditions I treat. Patients describe it as like being repeatedly stabbed in the face with a hot poker. Many can't eat, talk, or sleep. Some become suicidal." Her words took some of the fire out of me. "Still doesn't justify this." "No, it doesn't," she agreed. "But I wonder if I know this person. The symptoms are specific enough that they might have been my patient." We debated for hours as we continued cleaning. The professional in me wanted justice, wanted someone held accountable for destroying what I'd built. But the healer in me understood desperation, had seen people at their lowest when pain consumed everything. "Let me check my records first," Genevieve finally suggested. "If I can identify who it might be, we'll have a name to give the police anyway." That evening, I followed Genevieve to her home office, where she pulled up patient files on her secure medical system. I sat beside her, watching as she filtered for trigeminal neuralgia cases. 7 current patients, she murmured. But only 3 with the severe refractory type that would drive someone to this. She pulled up their information, studying each carefully. This one. Kylie Martinez. 29, onset after dental work 2 years ago. Failed response to carbamazepine, gabapentin, and pregabalin. Cancelled her last 3 appointments. Why would she cancel if she's in that much pain? I asked. Genevieve pulled up the billing screen and sighed. Insurance denials. She maxed out her coverage for specialist visits, and she works retail. Probably couldn't afford the out-of-pocket costs. We stared at each other, the reality settling in. A person in unbearable pain, unable to access care, desperate enough to break into an alternative medicine clinic. We still need to report this, I said firmly. But maybe we could check on her first, make sure she's okay? The next day, we drove to the address in Kylie's file, a small apartment complex on the south side of Fort Worth. No one answered her door, but an elderly neighbor confirmed she still lived there, though she hadn't been herself lately. What now? I asked as we returned to Genevieve's car. Stake out her apartment? Genevieve's mouth twitched with a half smile. Actually, yes. She works evening shifts at the pharmacy inside Crawford's grocery. We could wait there tonight. Which is how I found myself sitting in Genevieve's car outside a grocery store at 8 p.m., sharing lukewarm coffee and stale donuts like we were in some medical detective show. This is ridiculous, I muttered after the second hour. We don't even know what she looks like. Young Hispanic woman, dark hair, about 5'4", Genevieve recited. And I'd recognize her. I treated her for months. The night air grew chilly as we waited, and Genevieve switched on the heat. Our shoulders pressed together in the confines of her sedan, and despite the circumstances, I found myself acutely aware of her, the faint scent of her shampoo, the way she absent-mindedly twisted a strand of her copper hair when concentrating. Thank you, I said suddenly, for helping me with all this. She turned, our faces close in the dim car. What else would I do? Leave you to deal with this alone? Most people would, I admitted, especially after knowing me such a short time. Her eyes held mine, something unspoken passing between us. I'm not most people. My breath caught as her hand found mine in the darkness. The moment stretched, electric and fragile, until her phone alarm chimed, breaking the spell. Shift change, she said, turning back to watch the store entrance. If she's working today, she'll be coming out soon. But as closing time approached with no sign of Kylie, we realized our plan had failed. We'd have to try again tomorrow, or reconsider involving the police. As we walked back to Genevieve's apartment, she'd insisted I stay another night rather than return to my empty place above the damaged clinic. The exhaustion of the day finally hit me. One more day, Genevieve said as we entered her home. If we don't find her tomorrow, we call Detective Wilson with what we know. I nodded, too tired to argue, as she led me to her guest room, but as she turned to leave, I caught her wrist. Stay, I said, surprising myself. I don't want to be alone tonight. She hesitated only a moment before slipping under the covers beside me. In the darkness, with the day's stress and the growing attraction between us, what began as comfort evolved into something more urgent, more honest than either of us had allowed ourselves before. The next morning arrived with sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and Genevieve's arm draped across my waist. Last night had changed everything, crossing a line I hadn't even realized I was approaching until I was already over it. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, needing a moment alone to process. Over coffee in her kitchen, reality came rushing back. My clinic was still in shambles. We were still looking for a desperate woman who had destroyed my livelihood. And now I'd complicated everything by falling into bed with the one ally I had in this mess. Morning, Genevieve said, appearing in the doorway in an oversized t-shirt. You're thinking very loudly over there. Just processing, I admitted. Last night was unexpected? She offered, pouring herself coffee. But not unwelcome. At least not for me. Before I could respond, her phone rang. The hospital. While she took the call, I checked my own messages and found one from my insurance adjuster with a preliminary damage estimate that made my stomach drop. I've got to go in for an emergency consult, Genevieve said after hanging up. but I've been thinking about Kylie. What if we try the pharmacy again but separately this time? I'll go inside while you watch the exit. We agreed to meet at Crawford's Grocery at noon. I spent the morning at my clinic, salvaging what equipment I could and boarding up the broken window. Every smashed acupuncture needle and torn textbook fueled my anger, making me question our decision to approach Kylie privately, rather than turning her in. At the grocery store, Genevieve headed inside while I positioned myself in the cafe across the street with a clear view of the exits. After 20 minutes, my phone buzzed with a text. Found her. Pharmacy counter. Looks terrible. I hurried over, heart pounding. Inside, Genevieve was standing at the pharmacy counter talking to a young woman whose name tag read Kylie M. Even from a distance, I could see the pain etched in her face, the way she winced at every noise, how she held herself rigidly, as if any movement might trigger agony. She looked up as I approached, and I saw the moment recognition dawned in her eyes, not of me personally, but of what I represented, the acupuncturist whose clinic she had destroyed. Ms. Martinez, Genevieve said calmly, this is Molly Russell. I believe you visited her clinic recently. The woman's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking straight. The pain. It was the worst night yet. I'd been awake for 3 days. I wanted to be angry, had every right to be, but facing the reality of her suffering made it difficult to maintain. You destroyed everything I've built, I said, keeping my voice low. Why not just make an appointment? No insurance, she said, eyes downcast. And after what happened with the other treatments? I didn't think you'd help me. Other treatments? Genevieve asked. I had 2 failed surgeries, nerve blocks that didn't work. Nobody can help me, Kylie said, a blend of despair and defiance in her voice. I read online that acupuncture sometimes helps when nothing else does. I went to ask for help after hours, but no one was there. Then I saw all those supplies inside and I just broke. The manager approached, concerned about our intense conversation, but Kylie assured him everything was fine. Her shift ended in 20 minutes. Would we wait? Over coffee at a nearby diner, Kylie's story poured out. The dental procedure that had triggered the nerve pain. The mounting medical bills. The loss of her better job because she couldn't function through the pain. The isolation as friends tired of her constant cancellations. I'll pay for the damages, she promised, though we all knew her minimum wage job made that impossible. Turn me in if you need to. Sometimes I think jail might be better than living like this anyway. Genevieve and I exchanged glances. I saw in her eyes the same conflict I felt, professional obligation against human compassion. What if we tried something else? Genevieve finally said. A combined approach, my medical management alongside Molly's acupuncture. I can't afford either, Kylie reminded us. We'll figure something out, I said, surprising myself. A payment plan. Or maybe, I hesitated, the idea forming as I spoke. Maybe you help rebuild what you damaged, work it off. Genevieve raised an eyebrow, but didn't contradict me. Why would you help me? Kylie asked, suspicious. After what I did? I thought about the desperation that would drive someone to such lengths, about pain that consumed everything, about second chances. Because we're healers, I said finally. And you need healing. But first, no more break-ins. We do this properly or not at all. Word spreads fast in medical circles. Within a week of starting Kylie's combination treatment, I began noticing the whispers. It started with cancellations. 2 longtime patients suddenly unable to make their regular appointments. Then came the pointed questions from others. Are you working with Dr. White from Fort Worth General now? Asked Mrs. Hernandez, a retired nurse who'd been coming to me for arthritis treatments for years. The emphasis she placed on working with made her meaning clear. We're collaborating on a difficult case, I answered carefully, inserting a needle at the junction of her thumb and wrist. She responded. People are talking. They say she's at your clinic almost every evening. She wasn't wrong. Genevieve had been spending most evenings at Eastern Meridian, arriving after her hospital shifts to work with Kylie. We were documenting everything meticulously. Her pain levels, medication adjustments, response to specific acupuncture points. And yes, afterward, Genevieve often stayed. Sometimes we'd share takeout in my office, poring over research. Sometimes we'd end up at her place or the apartment above my clinic, continuing what had started that night after the stakeout. We were careful to keep our relationships separate from our professional collaboration. At least, we thought we were. Dr. Russell, my receptionist said one afternoon, her expression uncomfortable. There's a Dr. Lawrence here to see you. From the hospital ethics committee? My stomach dropped. Genevieve had mentioned this man, a traditionalist who viewed alternative medicine as quackery at best, dangerous at worst. Send him in, I said, straightening my lab coat. Dr. Lawrence didn't bother with pleasantries. I understand you've been treating hospital patients without credentials or oversight. I treat my own patients in my own licensed practice, I replied evenly. Any patients I share with hospital physicians come here of their own accord. And Dr. White's involvement? The hospital has concerns about her endorsing unproven methods. You'd have to discuss that with Dr. White. He leaned forward. Let me be direct. There are concerns about the nature of your relationship with Dr. White and how it might be influencing her professional judgment. The implication was clear. I kept my face neutral despite the anger building in my chest. My personal life is not relevant to my practice. He left with thinly veiled warnings about reviewing Genevieve's cases and possible disciplinary action. I called her immediately, hands shaking. That evening, Genevieve arrived looking exhausted. Lawrence called me in, suggested I'm compromising patient care by getting too close to alternative providers. He came here too, I admitted. Made it clear he knows about us. She sank onto my office couch. What do we do? I can't have my judgment questioned, but I also can't pretend our approach with Kylie isn't working. She's showing more improvement than with anything we tried before. Before I could answer, my phone alerted with a weather warning. The first major winter storm of the season was approaching faster than predicted. Already sleet was beginning to tap against the windows. You should go, I said reluctantly. The roads will be dangerous soon. But by the time we finished reviewing Kylie's case notes, ice was forming on the streets. Genevieve's car wouldn't start, battery dead in the sudden cold. Looks like you're stuck with me, I said, leading her up to my apartment above the clinic as the storm intensified. For 3 days, the ice storm paralyzed Fort Worth. Power flickered and failed across the city. Genevieve and I huddled under blankets, melting snow for water, cooking what we could on my gas stove. Cut off from the outside world, from professional pressures and others' judgments, we talked about everything. Our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. I've never felt like this before, Genevieve admitted on the second night, candlelight flickering across her face. With anyone. It scares me how quickly it happened. What scares you most? I asked, watching the shadows dance across her copper hair. That I'm risking everything I've worked for, she whispered. My reputation, my standing at the hospital, but also that I'd do it again. That you matter more than I expected anyone could. I kissed her, tasting the truth in her words, feeling the same fear and exhilaration. Outside, ice encased the world, but in my small apartment, something was thawing between us. The careful boundaries we'd maintained, the professional distance we'd tried to preserve. When power returned and the ice began to melt, reality waited for us. Genevieve had meetings with the hospital administration. I had a clinic to rebuild and patients who needed reassurance about my professionalism. But something had solidified during those 3 frozen days. A certainty that whatever came next, we would face it together. 6 months can change everything. By late spring, Kylie's case had become our proof of concept, a documented success story combining Western pain management with Eastern medicine. Her trigeminal neuralgia wasn't cured, but the frequency and intensity of her attacks had diminished drastically. She could eat normally again, hold conversations without wincing, even laugh without fear of triggering pain. More importantly, she'd kept her promise to help rebuild what she'd destroyed. Her pharmacy experience proved useful for inventory management, and her genuine remorse translated into dedicated work. She'd become more than a patient. She was part of our growing practice. Though our practice was still technically 2 separate entities. Genevieve maintained her hospital position while consulting at Eastern Meridian twice weekly. I continued running my acupuncture clinic, though now with a waiting list of pain patients referred from Fort Worth General's more open-minded physicians. We should make it official, Genevieve said one evening as we closed up the clinic. A true integrated practice. Your methods, my medical oversight. We could help so many more patients. The idea both thrilled and terrified me. What about the hospital? Your career? I'd keep some hospital hours for surgical cases, but honestly, Molly, I'm making more difference here. And the administration has backed off since we published that case series. She was right. Our paper documenting 5 complex pain cases treated with our integrated approach had silenced many critics, though not all. Dr. Lawrence and his traditionalist colleagues still glared whenever Genevieve and I attended medical functions together. It's a big step, I said cautiously, professionally and personally. Speaking of personally, Genevieve helped me lock up, then followed me upstairs to my apartment. I've been thinking. We spend almost every night together, either here or at my place. Wouldn't it make more sense to just live in one place? My heart stuttered. Are you asking me to move in with you? Or you could ask me to move in with you, she countered with a smile. Either way, I'm tired of having half my clothes in each location. I looked around my small apartment, the space I'd carefully made my own when I first opened the clinic. Your place has more room, I admitted, but this location is convenient for work. We don't have to decide tonight, she said, sensing my hesitation. It's a big change. That night, as she slept beside me, I found myself staring at the ceiling, examining my reluctance. It wasn't that I didn't want to live with Genevieve. Rather, I'd spent so long building my independent life and practice that merging it with someone else's, even someone I loved, felt like a surrender of something essential. The next morning, we were jolted awake by my phone. My receptionist's panicked voice greeted me. Someone broke into the clinic again. It's bad, Molly. We rushed downstairs to find not random destruction this time, but targeted vandalism. Red spray paint across the newly replaced front window, fake medicine kills. Inside, my diplomas had been torn down again and defaced. Equipment smashed, but most disturbing was the anatomical model in the waiting room. Acupuncture points carefully marked with needles, which had been mutilated, needles stabbed violently into the eyes and throat. The police took statements, but I knew this wasn't about theft. This was targeted hatred. It has to be someone from the medical community, Genevieve said as we cleaned up later. Someone threatened by what we're doing. I nodded, remembering the arguments at the medical conference after our paper was presented. The dismissive comments, the thinly veiled hostility from certain specialists who saw pain management as their exclusive territory. This won't stop us, I said, more determined than angry. If anything, it proves we're making them nervous. That what we're doing works. Genevieve looked at me with surprised admiration. 6 months ago, this would have devastated you. 6 months ago, I was alone, I replied simply. That evening, exhausted from cleaning and filing police reports, we collapsed on my couch. I turned to her suddenly, decision made. Let's do it, the integrated practice. And yes, let's move in together, but let's find a new place, something that's ours, not yours or mine. You're sure? She asked, searching my face. I'm sure I don't want separate lives anymore, I answered. The rest we'll figure out. The sign above our new clinic gleamed in the October sunshine, Integrated Pain Solutions. 6 months since the vandalism incident, and here we stood on opening day, Genevieve in a tailored blazer, me in my most professional outfit, welcoming our first patients to a space that was truly ours. The renovated Victorian house on Medical Row had enough room for everything, Genevieve's exam rooms equipped with modern diagnostic equipment, my treatment spaces with their subtle Eastern influences, and a shared consultation office where we developed integrated care plans. The building even had a comfortable apartment upstairs where we'd made our home together. Not bad for a year's work, I murmured as Genevieve joined me at the reception desk between patients. From misdelivered package to medical partners, she replied, her hand brushing mine briefly. Though I think we've accomplished even more in our personal life. She wasn't wrong. Our home above the clinic had become the refuge I never knew I needed, a place where Eastern medicine textbooks, shared shelf space with neuroanatomy journals, where Genevieve's precise organizational systems somehow complemented my more intuitive approach. Our first day was packed with appointments, many former patients from both our practices, but also new referrals curious about our integrated approach. By afternoon, we'd settled into a rhythm, consulting each other between patients, combining our expertise in ways that still felt revolutionary. I was finishing documentation on a particularly complex case when Kylie knocked on my office door. She'd transitioned from patient to part-time clinic coordinator, managing our schedule and inventory with the same attention to detail she'd shown at the pharmacy. Package for you, she said, handing me a small box. No delivery service marking though. Someone must have dropped it off. The box was wrapped in brown paper with just my name written in block letters. No address or return information. An uneasy feeling crawled up my spine as I carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a small lacquered box. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. A single acupuncture needle lay broken in half, wrapped in a note. "Still practicing your fake medicine?" I called Genevieve immediately. We contacted the police, reviewed security footage, and implemented new safety measures. But the threat hung over what should have been a purely celebratory time. "They're just trying to scare us," Genevieve said that evening as we locked up, "because we're succeeding where they said we couldn't." "I know," I agreed. "But it's working. I am scared." She pulled me close. "That's human. But we're not backing down." Despite the threat, our practice continued to grow. Patients who had exhausted conventional options found relief through our combined approach. Kylie's case study was accepted by a prestigious medical journal. Even some hospital colleagues who'd initially been skeptical began referring their most challenging cases. Then, exactly 1 year from the day I'd delivered that misplaced package to Genevieve's door, disaster struck again. We arrived at the clinic to find windows smashed, hateful graffiti covering our sign, and worst of all, patient files ransacked, private medical information exposed and scattered. This time, the police took it more seriously. The targeting of patient information elevated the crime. Security cameras had caught images of the vandal, a figure who looked disturbingly familiar. "It's Lawrence," Genevieve whispered as we reviewed the footage with the detective. "From the ethics committee." The investigation moved quickly after that. Dr. Lawrence's professional jealousy and rigid medical orthodoxy had apparently festered into something dangerous. When confronted, he collapsed, confessing to both vandalism incidents. In the aftermath, support poured in from the medical community and patients alike. What our opponent had intended as our destruction became our strongest validation. 1 year to the day after that second attack, I stood in our fully restored clinic, watching Genevieve speak with a patient. The confidence in her manner, the way she seamlessly integrated my techniques into her recommendations, it all reminded me how far we'd come. That evening, as we closed up, Genevieve seemed uncharacteristically nervous. She kept checking her watch and rearranging items on her desk. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just thinking about packages," she said cryptically, "and how they can change everything." She pulled a small box from her pocket, not wrapped in threatening brown paper, but elegant blue with a silver ribbon. 1 year ago today, we faced someone who wanted to tear us apart. I think it's the perfect day to make sure that never happens. Inside the box was a key, not to the clinic we already shared, but something new. "I bought that little cottage on Lake Worth," she explained. "The one we walked past last month, our weekend getaway, our future, whenever we're ready." I looked from the key to the woman who had transformed my life by simply showing up at my door with a misdelivered package. "I've been ready since the moment you walked into my clinic," I said, pulling her close for a kiss that promised many more years of unexpected deliveries.